Good morning. Our focus this month is loving kindness and forgiveness and how that leads to goodness and peace and mercy and justice and truth, all in 25 minutes. It's a lot, isn't it? It's a lot to deal with in our world right now, too, in such a short amount of time. But I'm trying, I'm reading, I'm trying to educate myself, and I was looking around on the internet, and I saw this statement. It said, if you're going to pray for France, which God are you going to pray to? And it really touched me because I think it's an indication of the frustration that many people are feeling right now. I think some people are feeling fed up with an endless list of tragedies to pray for. Exhausted. And I think some people are wondering if it's enough. Is prayer enough? And, I think that when one says, if a person says, I'm praying for you, or I'm thinking of you, or I'm holding in my thoughts, or I'm sending you love or energy, it can be both a real sentiment for people who are actually doing that, as well as a figure of speech. So in addition to a person who might be sitting down and praying sincerely, sometimes people say that as a way of expressing care and connection and solidarity because they don't know what else to do. Well, I like to be genuine. If I say I'm going to pray for someone, I do it, I'm concerned about the law of cause and effect, in that regard. I don't just say it as a figure of speech. If I say it, I do it. Because I believe in prayer, and I enjoy praying very much. And I was reading an article on the web in which the writer, it's an article for spiritually minded people, a cautionary article. It's saying for spiritually minded people, it's a good idea to check in with our responses to world crisis, to make sure we aren't hiding behind words. We aren't hiding behind a shield of spirituality, taking the easy route. For example, if I'm saying I'm sending light and love, is that really my way of keeping my distance from what's going on and staying safe in my silence? Or if I say, I'm looking for the positive in this situation, is that possibly a way of avoiding dealing with what's actually happening in the world? Or if I say, the spiritual reality is that all is well, which may be true, but is it also a way of me negating the experience that some people are really having? And the writer of the article suggests that we can do better than be silent. We can do better than retreat into our own spiritual self-care. She says prayer is a wonderful thing, of course, especially for those who believe in it. Do it. And can a person also let their prayer inspire them into action? Well, what action? Well, that's going to be different one person to the next. The main point I got out of the article is for me to keep moving through my fear and not let it cause me to become numb or isolate, not to retreat and wait for somebody else to figure out how to handle the world. It really made an impact on me, and I do like to pray, and I do believe in it. And in our tradition, when we pray, to answer the question, which God are you going to pray to? Well, we don't really pray to God, not in the common sense of appealing to a creator somewhere to get involved and make a favorable change in circumstances, not in that way. Our God, we might say, is the creative power of life itself. To us, divinity is the mind or the intelligence of creation itself. And so our prayer is what we do in our own minds to align with that again over and over again, to align with the original goodness of the original mind. So in other words, we pray to remember that we are made out of that wholeness and then to act accordingly so that its goodness can come into manifestation through us in the world. So we don't exactly pray for divine intervention to work on our behalf in the world. You might say it's almost the other way. We pray for the clarity to know that power and identify with that power. And we could say we act on its behalf in the world. So our prayers ought not to lead us into distancing and isolation and silence. I recently completed writing a book titled Ordinary Goodness. The subtitle is The Surprising, Effortless Path to Creating a Life of Meaning and Beauty. And it's going to be published on January 3rd, the day before my birthday. And it is available for pre-order on Amazon. Nothing like a little bit of shameless self-promotion, right? But I bring it up because I loved writing a book on goodness, especially during these times. You know, if a person spends a year thinking about and researching and writing about goodness, it's going to get into you. It's going to work its magic on you because you're going to have to look at it and you're going to have to look for it. And not only that, you're going to have to figure out how to deal with its opposite. It's very rich. I highly recommend it. And the project, I would say it's renewed my faith in goodness, and it's reminded me that when we access the goodness that is in us and when we use it, we become capable of extraordinary acts of peace, mercy, justice, and truth. When we do. See, what I love about goodness is that, in my opinion, it's natural to us. If we turn to it, it's there. And I would say, except in extreme cases, goodness doesn't need any special skill or special learning to use. It's like a dormant seed in the earth of our being, waiting for the right circumstances for it to come forth. And the right circumstances, you might say, are to shower the light of our attention on it. In other words, to look for it. Or to feed it with our interest and consideration. In other words, to consult it. Look for it and consult it. That's been my mantra. Look for it and consult it. And one way I've learned to do that is just simply to ask myself in times of distress, what would goodness have me do here? During the writing of the book, I was discussing it with a friend. We were talking about how to be kind, which is a form of goodness, while at the same time remaining true to one's values. Because we were discussing that story in the news from 2015 in which a Michigan mechanic apparently said he would not work on the car of anybody who was openly homosexual. And we were discussing this and the line where human or civil rights intersects with religious opinions, and asking the question, how can we make room for the diversity of ways of believing and still live according to our conscience and preserve each other's civil rights? It's complicated. It's a lot. And so we were using the example of same-sex marriage to consider. And today in our country, anybody can get legally married, and anybody can get legally divorced. However, the religions of our nation do not agree that this is okay. Well, I love that I live in the United States where I don't have to believe other people's religions. I love that I'm free to have the opinion that marriage is a spiritual union and that divorce ought to be a spiritual separation. And so my friend asked me, he said, would you be willing to extend your professional services as a wedding officiant to all who come to you? And I said quickly, yes. It was a trap. He got me, Because he just asked quietly then if there was anyone that I would feel personally challenged to serve, whether that was for performing a wedding or baking a cake or fixing a car. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. So I had to think about it, he got me. I had to think about all the people who challenged me. Because everybody's got somebody who challenged them. Even people who are deeply in love tweak each other now and then, it happens. I would have been dishonest if I said to him, yeah, I love all people equally all the time. Sometimes when people challenge my patience, my ordinary goodness goes out the window, Or when I'm tired and my resources are low, I don't have the energy to consult goodness. Or when a situation arises that challenges my value and that burn that rises up can be difficult to remember to consult goodness. So my friend asked if I would perform a wedding for a couple from out of town who turned out to be white supremacists, and they had invited an all-white audience, and they wanted me to include words in the ceremony that reflected on their belief. I became defensive really quickly. And I said, look, being gay is not a choice. Being a white supremacist is a choice. It's optional. You don't have to do that. And he just very quietly asked me, well, what would the kindest thing be to do? I'm glad he asked me the questions, because he was helping me clarify my position. And there are so many things in the world today that I want to get clearer on. Where do I stand? Because when you're clearer, you can speak from it. That's how we don't retreat. We get clear and speak from it. So I said to him I would decline the job as kindly as I could, and I would explain why. And it got me to think that being kind is not the same as being weak. Kind doesn't mean being silent or avoiding or denying or retreating from the world. Being kind is an attitude of life that seeks out the gentlest path available. But it doesn't settle for injustice or doesn't avoid discomfort. The road to kindness will not necessarily keep us away from painful and difficult choices, and neither will it take away the responsibility to have important conversations, and it certainly won't make everyone agree with everything. So this whole conversation between my friend and I, it caused us to think about who our role models are. And what would our role models do in similar challenging situations? What would Buddha do? What would Jesus do? What would Mahatma Gandhi do? What would Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. do? Well, there are clues in the stories of Jesus' life, like the well-known story of the Mosaic law regarding adultery, clear-cut case. Adulterers must be stoned to death. And the story is an illustration of the difference between making a choice based on law and mob mentality and outrage versus making the more difficult choice based on compassion and kindness when it flies in the face of the law. It's because in the story, the people who knew the law very, very well, they were testing Jesus. They wanted to know how he would react in a clear-cut case. Here's an adulteress, stone her to death. It's legal. It's justifiable. Because they knew he was coming out for kindness and fairness. They probably knew the law was barbaric. They wanted to see what he would do. And the way he handled it, as you probably know, is he turned it on them and said, let you who is without sin cast the first stone. In other words, he wouldn't condemn her. He would not act out the unjust law. On one hand, his integrity and kindness in this incident is an example that I would follow gladly. On the other hand, he was outspoken and unkind in a way that I have no desire to mimic. I'll tell you what I mean. I'm talking about his visit to the temple. He went to the temple, and because merchants had set up shop there and turned the sacred place into a marketplace, he was outraged. And some people say that his behavior was justified. But if you read the report in the book of John, it says he fashioned a whip and drove them out and damaged their property. Now, that is not a model for handling disagreement that I want to follow. That response to disagreement is unkind. And the world has had enough of religiously inspired violence. Enough with whips. Enough with beheading. Enough with violence. There's got to be a better way to solve our differences than hurting each other. Well, it takes a lot of courage to say that to a role model. I won't follow that. Now, I don't think I ought to be permitted to treat people violently if they offend my religious values. The line between human rights and religious thinking is wiggly right now. And the guidance one person receives from her faith tradition isn't going to satisfy everybody else, and so it goes. And the place where we meet is where we will find the answers, and it is not in religion. It is in our humanity. What we have in common is that we are human. And humans love to love. And they love to be loved. And kindness, a beautiful form of love, is something that can cross every boundary. And I believe it can and it will guide us into how to care about each other if we look for it and if we consult with it. Look for it and consult with it. I'm sticking with that. It will guide us. I can imagine a world in which we are kind and compassionate to each other, regardless of our faith and nationality and gender and political point of view. But I cannot see a way for that to come into being if there are signs that hang on businesses saying, no Episcopals allowed here. No heterosexuals served in this establishment. Christians not welcome here. Divorced people may not enter. A Catholic writer, a blogger, she presented some tough questions for her Catholic readers, just challenging them to be consistent when it comes time to stand on moral ground. So she asked them to imagine that they are a florist, and a customer orders a floral arrangement to be made, and they want it for their divorce party, as some people do. They have divorce parties. And she said, how would you respond as a Catholic florist? Would you say, I'm sorry, Catholicism is very clear about divorce and marriage, and I don't want to give tacit approval or support to your divorce? Would you make the flowers? She asked them also to imagine if they were a photographer and an unwed mother arrives at their job and asks for a photo with their baby, newborn baby. She said, as a Catholic photographer, what would you do? Now, although I'm not Catholic and I don't share those values, the point she is making about consistency is compelling. And I get it. You know, if I'm going to be judgmental, at least let me be consistent about it. Not just pick the one group or individual who challenges me. Let me judge them all. And similarly, if I'm going to be kind, can I at least try to be more consistent about it? And not just pick the one group or individual that resonates with me. What would Jesus do with people whose point of view was different to his? Well, we have to put his behavior in the temple aside for a moment and to look instead at his recommendation given in the Sermon on the Mount. Was that's good advice. Here's a paraphrased version of it. You have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For God makes the sun rise on the good and the bad and sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. And here's the line for us. For if you love those who love you, what's the use of that? Anybody can do that. That's not hard. That doesn't bring peace and justice and truth into fruition. What would Buddha do? Well, we already know from the words from chapter 1 of the Dhammapada. The phrase I want to share with you is short, but I want to read you the preamble to it because it sets the scene. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a person speaks or acts with evil thought, pain follows that person. If a person speaks or acts with an evil thought, pain follows that person. Just as the wheel follows the foot of the ox that draws the carriage. Then he repeats, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our thoughts. It is made up of our thoughts. If a person speaks or acts with pure thought, happiness follows that person like a shadow that never leaves. He abused me, she beat me, he defeated me, she robbed me. In those who harbor such thoughts, hatred will never cease. She abused me, he beat me, she defeated me, he robbed me. In those who do not harbor such thoughts, hatred will cease. And here's the line. For hatred does not cease by hatred at any time. And this was already an old idea in Buddha's time. Hatred ceases by love. What would Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. do? Well, we already know from any one of his excellent public addresses. Like this one. Here's another reason why you should love your enemies. And that is because hate distorts the personality of the hater. We usually think of what hate does for the individual hated, or the individuals hated, or the groups hated, but it is even more tragic. It is even more ruinous and injurious to the individuals who hate. You just begin hating somebody and you will begin to do irrational things. You can't see straight when you hate. You can't walk straight when you hate. You can't stand upright. Your vision is distorted. There's nothing more tragic to see than an individual's heart is filled with hate, it comes to the point that it becomes a pathological case. For the person who hates, the beautiful becomes ugly and the ugly becomes beautiful. For the person who hates, the good becomes bad and the bad becomes good. For the person who hates, the true becomes false and the false becomes true. That is what hate does. You can't see right. The symbol of objectivity is lost. Hate destroys the very structure of the personality of the hater. So, not only do we have our role models to consult in this world, but I offer to you that we have also our natural born goodness to consult. And this week, what I plan to do is to ask myself repeatedly, when it comes to peace, what would goodness have me do? When it comes to justice, what would goodness have me do? When it comes to truth, what would goodness have me do? And I hope you will also. I invite you to breathe in with me now, and to exhale as you close your eyes as we join in a moment of prayer, as we each in our own way acknowledge that creative source, the eternal, invisible, immortal power that is creation, the mind of creation, the intelligence of creation. It is without beginning and without end. It was in the beginning and ever shall be. It extends in every direction and is everywhere present. We recognize it so that we may remember that we live and breathe and move and have our being within its center. We are made of its love. We inherit its qualities. And so I realize that the everywhere present love of the universe is what loves through my heart. The intelligence that governs the universe is the wisdom that thinks through my mind. And this is true for all of us. And so I invite myself to be open, to be inspired from within by that love, to let it propel me and inspire me to do what is mine to do, to love in a way that is deeper and more expansive than I ever have before, to lean into my world with open heart and clear mind and loving inclinations, to trust that the intellect that creation has made in me, in us, is sufficient to meet this world and its needs. And so, I affirm that I am not able to be hypnotized by mob mentality. I cannot be overwhelmed by a tide of news, for I am deeply rooted in the truth of knowing. I stand strong, speak clearly, and clarify my position. I do this with a heart of love. Already I feel gratitude for remembering this. And so I release this word of prayer. And it is the case that the spiritual laws of the universe respond instantly, as if there is a conspiracy of energies around creation to help me to act out what I have prayed about. And together we say, and so it is. And I invite you to breathe in again and sigh.